The courtroom was silent in a way that made every heartbeat feel louder. People filled every bench, shoulder to shoulder, waiting for a moment they did not believe would ever happen. The bailiff stepped forward. His voice cut through the thick air. "All rise." Chairs scraped. Feet shuffled. Conversations died instantly. The tall doors at the back opened, and deputies walked in with the defendant. A woman in chains. Wrists bound. Head lowered. The orange uniform dull under the fluorescent lights. Her name was Paula Hastings, former HOA president of Cedar Ridge Estates in Greenville, South Carolina. Weeks before, she had been the neighbor who wrote letters about grass height and bin placement. Now she walked into court accused of setting her neighbor's house on fire in the middle of the night. She lifted her eyes to the bench, maybe expecting a stranger in a robe. What she saw instead made her stop moving. The judge was the man whose home she burned. Judge Caleb Morris. Calm posture. Black robe. No smile. No anger in his expression. Only a steady presence that held the whole room. The gallery buzzed. A few people whispered. Others stared in disbelief. A judge forced to face the person who destroyed his home. A defendant forced to face the man she'd tried to scare, silence, or maybe erase. Caleb didn't look away. "Be seated." Everyone lowered themselves into their seats. The room settled. The weight of the past few weeks pressed onto every person present. Paula's attorney leaned in quickly, his voice sharp. "Do not look at him, look at me only." But the entire courtroom had already seen everything they needed to see. Her shock. Her fear. Her guilt flickering across her face. It was a moment no one in Cedar Ridge would forget. A moment that made every neighbor in the room finally ask themselves a question they should have asked a long time ago. How did it come to this? Because a few months earlier, everything on their street was quiet. Typical. The kind of neighborhood where families grilled on Saturdays and kids threw basketballs in driveways until the streetlights came on. No one imagined a house would burn. No one imagined that hatred could grow quietly enough to pass for regular neighbor trouble. But the fire wasn't the beginning. It was only the final strike in a storm that had been gathering slowly, quietly, and dangerously. This story doesn't start in a courtroom. It begins in a quiet cul-de-sac where people thought their biggest problems would be trash cans and weekend noise. They were wrong. Now, to understand how a neighborhood dispute became a criminal case that would shake an entire community, we have to go back to when Judge Caleb Morris first moved into Cedar Ridge. When Caleb bought his brick one-story home on Pinecrest Lane, he told his sister that the place felt peaceful. He had moved from a busier part of the state, hoping for a quieter life after years of long court days and heavy cases. He wanted space to breathe. A fresh start. A place where he could drink coffee on his porch without hearing traffic or constant sirens. Cedar Ridge seemed perfect for that. He blended right in. Waved at neighbors. Kept his yard neat. Worked his cases with the same calm presence people knew him for. His mother used to say he was a man who could hold steady even when the world shook. But even steady people feel it when someone starts pushing at them day after day. And in Cedar Ridge, that push came in the form of Paula Hastings. At first glance, Paula looked like any other neighbor. Late 50s. Clean front porch. Always holding a clipboard at HOA meetings. She smiled when she wanted to. She scowled more often. People said she had lived in the community since the first homes were built. They said she cared too much about the rulebook. Some said she cared more about the rules than the people. To some residents, she was organized. To others, she was the one you didn't want to argue with. But no one knew how far she could go. Caleb's first meeting with her came on a Tuesday evening as he watered the small row of plants near his porch. He heard hurried footsteps, then saw Paula standing at the edge of his walkway, pen in hand. "Mr. Morris, your porch light stays on longer than the approved time." Caleb blinked, surprised. Good evening to you too. The light shuts off around midnight. It's for safety. Paula shook her head. The rule says 11. You're breaking it. Her tone didn't sound like someone informing a new neighbor. It sounded like someone correcting a child. Caleb nodded calmly. All right, I'll take a look. He expected that to be the end of it. It wasn't. 3 days later, he found a letter in his mailbox. Hedge height violation. A week after that, another note. Mailbox paint tone not within HOA palette. Then a complaint about his recycling bin position. Then a warning about a guest parking too close to the curb. At first, he chuckled. He called his friend Eric, who lived half an hour away. This woman takes the rulebook too seriously. That's the biggest problem so far. Eric laughed. Sounds like she walks around the neighborhood with measuring tape. Caleb smiled. But beneath the laugh, he knew it wasn't normal. People didn't get this many letters unless something else was happening. Neighbors began noticing too. One afternoon at the mailbox, Janet, who lived 2 houses down, leaned in and lowered her voice. She doesn't treat anyone else like this, only you. It's strange. Caleb shrugged. Maybe she expects a lot from new people. Janet shook her head. No, Caleb, this feels different. But he brushed it off. He wanted peace. He believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt. Yet every letter, every glare from Paula's front porch, every moment she stood just a little too long staring toward his yard, pressed heavier on him. His sister Maya spotted the stack of letters on his kitchen counter one evening when she visited. All this from one neighbor. Every one, Caleb said, same handwriting, same signature. Maya frowned. You're a judge, you've handled dangerous people before. Are you sure this is just about rules? Caleb stirred the pot on the stove and hesitated. I'm trying not to assume the worst. But the worst was coming anyway. While Caleb tried to ignore the tension, Paula was feeding it, talking about him in meetings, watching him from across the street, building something dark inside her that no rulebook could excuse. And soon, her complaints would turn into something no neighborhood had ever imagined. Because obsession only needs time to grow. And Paula had plenty of it. Caleb didn't know it yet, but Paula's irritation wasn't fading. It was deepening. With every complaint she wrote, every rule she quoted, something inside her tightened. Neighbors noticed subtle things at first. She lingered outside longer than usual. She paced along the curb with a notebook in hand. She watched Caleb's house as if waiting for something only she understood. One Saturday morning, Caleb was outside trimming the small rose bush near the walkway. He heard her voice before he even saw her. You know, yard waste has rules. He stood slowly, pruning shears still in his hand, and saw Paula standing at the edge of the lawn holding her phone upright like she was filming. Good morning to you too, he said. I've always taken care of my yard. She stepped closer, snapping another picture. I suppose we'll see what the board thinks. He let the silence sit. Then he shook his head. Paula, do you really think neighbors should treat each other like this? Her expression tightened. Neighbors follow rules. Some people think they're above them. Before Caleb could respond, a car pulled into the driveway. His friend Eric stepped out, tall and relaxed, holding a fishing rod he had borrowed weeks earlier. Everything all right here? Eric asked, glancing between them. Paula folded her arms. Ensuring compliance, that's my responsibility. Eric stared at her for a moment. He's got the cleanest yard on this street. Her face flushed. She turned around sharply and walked back to her house, heels hitting the pavement with quick, angry steps. Eric watched her go, then exhaled. Caleb, she's locked onto you, and not in a way that ends with letters. Caleb tried to brush it off. She'll cool down. Eric raised a brow. She doesn't look like someone who cools down. Paula did not cool down. She escalated. Neighbors started to notice her walking late at night, stopping in front of Caleb's property, staring without moving. Some tried not to look. Others whispered about her at the mailbox or while mowing their lawns. One evening, Caleb's sister Maya came over. She had brought leftover stew from a family dinner earlier that day. As she set the container on the counter, she noticed the growing pile of letters. She picked one up and sighed. "This is obsessive." Maya said. "This isn't normal." Caleb leaned against the counter. "I know, I just don't want to treat a neighbor like an enemy." Maya tapped the paper. "She's already decided you are one." Later that week, Caleb stepped outside at dusk and saw Paula standing across the street holding a flashlight. It wasn't even fully dark yet. She was shining the beam at his driveway and mailbox, slowly moving it back and forth as if cataloging something only she could see. Caleb raised his hand slightly. "Paula, can I help you with something?" She turned the light off. "Just checking for violations." He let out a breath, turned, and went inside. He didn't slam the door, but he shut it more firmly than usual. Maya's words echoed in his head. One night, Caleb decided to talk to Paula directly. He walked across the street and knocked on her front door. She opened it quicker than he expected, like she had been standing right behind it. "Paula," he began, "we need to talk." She crossed her arms. "About what?" "This needs to stop. Your letters, your photos, your threats. You've made this personal." She smirked, but it wasn't amusement. It was cold. "Personal? You think I'm doing this because of you? I treat everyone the same." Caleb leaned in slightly. "Then why am I the only one receiving 3 letters a week?" For the first time, something flickered across her face. Not guilt. Not fear. Something closer to resentment. "Because you don't belong here," she said quietly, "not the way you think you do." Caleb felt the words land harder than any complaint she had written. He nodded once. "Good night, Paula." He turned to go back to his home, but her voice followed him. "You can wear that robe in court, but it won't protect you here." Her words stayed with him long after he closed his door. He told Maya about the exchange a few days later. She sat down heavily at the kitchen table. "You need to start documenting everything. If she crosses the line, we're going to need proof." Caleb agreed, even though part of him hated that his home had become a place he had to defend. He installed small security cameras around his property, not because he thought Paula would do something extreme, but because he needed peace of mind. That's what he told himself anyway. But the cameras didn't reassure him. They only revealed what he didn't want to see. Paula standing on the sidewalk at midnight. Paula photographing his yard during early morning hours. Paula pacing slowly along the curb with a notebook held tight against her chest. One evening, Caleb invited Maya over and showed her a clip where Paula stood still at the end of the driveway for nearly 5 minutes. Maya watched with growing concern. "She's obsessed, Caleb. This is not about rules." Caleb replied quietly. "Obsession is one thing. Malice is another. I need to understand which one this is." But he already knew. And she had already crossed that line. Life continued around them anyway. Caleb worked at the courthouse. Heard cases. Advised new attorneys. Attended church on Sundays, where neighbors greeted him with warm smiles. Yet every time he drove home, a knot tightened in his chest. Home was supposed to give him peace. Instead, it reminded him of the weight of another conflict waiting across the street. One Friday evening, he sat on the porch with his teenage nephew, Logan, who had just turned 16. Logan looked at the stack of letters and reports on the small side table. "Why don't you just move, Uncle Caleb?" Caleb looked at him, surprise crossing his face. "Move? This is my home, Logan. I built this life here. Why should I leave because someone can't stand me?" Logan shrugged. "Feels like it'd be easier." Caleb sighed. "Easy isn't always right. If I walk away, she wins, and what message would that teach you?" Logan nodded slowly. "I get it." Caleb hoped he did. But even he felt the pressure building. Every complaint, every glare across the street, every late-night appearance in the camera footage felt like another step toward something he didn't want to imagine. Neighbors began whispering about Paula openly now. They watched her muttering during evening walks. She would stop at the corner and look toward Caleb's home with a look that unsettled even people who barely knew her. One neighbor told Maya, "She stands there like she's waiting for him to make a mistake." But Caleb didn't need to make a mistake for Paula to escalate. She was already gathering a storm. The final spark came during a community meeting. Residents filled the room, the usual chatter about landscaping and pool rules echoing softly at first. Caleb sat near the back. He didn't plan to speak. He rarely did at these meetings. But Paula did. "There are residents here who refuse to follow this community's standards," she said loudly. "Some people think they are above everyone else." Every face turned toward Caleb even before Paula's eyes did. A neighbor named Janet stood up. "Paula, Caleb has done more for this neighborhood than any of us. He shoveled snow, he helped me fix my fence." Paula snapped back. "Good deeds don't erase violations. Some people hide behind their titles." Caleb stood slowly, adjusted his jacket. "I've respected this community," he said calmly, "but this has gone too far. This isn't about small rules anymore. This is about you and the anger you've chosen to hold." The room fell silent. Paula's face tightened with rage, but she said nothing. People left shaken. Some apologized to Caleb quietly in the parking lot. Others avoided eye contact, unsure how to handle the tension that had finally boiled over. But while neighbors wondered what would happen next, Paula was already deciding her next move. And this time, she wouldn't settle for letters or warnings. Because anger that goes unchecked doesn't fade. It erupts. And soon, the consequences would reach far beyond their quiet street. Caleb tried to shake off the tension from the meeting, but something inside him felt heavier than before. It wasn't embarrassment or frustration. It was a sense that something had shifted beyond the point of return. Even the air around Cedar Ridge felt different in the days that followed, like the neighborhood itself sensed a storm coming. Paula's behavior grew bolder. She didn't hide her watching anymore. One neighbor reported seeing her standing in her driveway whispering to herself, staring across the street as if replaying an argument only she could hear. Another claimed she stopped her dog walks just to glare at Caleb's windows. People began avoiding her entirely, stepping back inside when she opened her door or crossing the street to stay out of her path. Still, Caleb hoped she would eventually calm down. He hoped she'd get tired of the conflict. But the truth was, Paula seemed energized by it. Each incident seemed to harden her emotions instead of wearing them out. One night, Caleb came home late from the courthouse. He stepped out of his car, tired and ready to shower and sleep. As he walked up the path, Paula appeared on her porch. Half lit by her outdoor lamp, she held a glass of red wine and stared at him like she'd been waiting. "You think you're better than us, Mr. Morris?" Caleb stopped, keys in hand. "I've just had a long day. Let's leave this alone." Paula took a slow sip of wine. "No, you think you can twist rules the way you twist your cases, but you can't twist me." He chose not to respond. He opened his door and stepped inside. He locked it quietly. Minutes later, something hit the front door, hard enough to make Maya jump from the couch. Caleb hurried to the entryway and checked the porch footage. A small stone lay on the doormat. And in the corner of the recording, Paula's shadow slipped out of sight. Maya rushed to his side. She threw something at the house. "Caleb, this isn't normal. This is harassment." Caleb nodded, jaw tight. "I'm documenting everything, but right now it's still technically nuisance, not criminal." Maya shook her head. "She's pushing the line, you can see that." Neighbors saw it too. They whispered to each other, warning their kids to stay away from Paula's end of the street. One family overheard her repeating the same phrase during her nightly walk. "He doesn't belong here. He never did. He never will." They shut their curtains after that. Caleb tried to stay calm, but something inside him was wearing thin. He had been firm with violent offenders in courtrooms. He had remained steady through trials that lasted weeks. But being the target inside his own home felt different. It felt personal. It felt invasive in a way no courtroom case ever had. Then came the night that changed everything. A week after the community meeting, Caleb woke at 2 in the morning to the faintest sound. It wasn't loud. More like a crackle. He sat up slowly, unsure if he had imagined it. Then he smelled it, something acidic, something wrong. Smoke. He swung his legs out of bed and rushed into the hallway. His eyes watered instantly. Thick, gray smoke was rolling up the staircase like a wave. The alarm suddenly screamed from the living room, sharp and relentless. Caleb covered his mouth with his sleeve and crouched low. His heart pounded so loudly it filled his ears. He grabbed his phone, dialing 911. His voice broke as he gave the address, coughing between words. The dispatcher told him to get out immediately. He moved as fast as he could, but the heat grew stronger with every step. Sparks jumped across the railing. Flames climbed the wall beside the staircase. The fire had already spread too far. When he pushed open the front door, a burst of hot air brushed his face. He stumbled onto the sidewalk, gasping for clean air. Across the street, doors opened one by one. Janet ran out barefoot, covering her mouth. "Caleb, oh my God, Caleb, over here." Her husband rushed forward, helping him stand. Caleb clutched his briefcase, the only thing he'd managed to grab on his way out. Papers spilled from the sides as he held it close. Sirens filled the night, red flashing lights bouncing off roofs. Fire trucks screeched to a stop. Firefighters leapt out, unrolling hoses and shouting orders. The roar of water meeting fire filled the neighborhood. Caleb stood trembling on the grass, watching helplessly as flames devoured the home he had once called peaceful. Eric arrived minutes later, breathless. "Caleb, my God, are you hurt? Are you breathing?" Caleb nodded weakly, voice hoarse. "She did this, Eric, I know she did." Eric clenched his jaw. Who else would go this far? People have been watching her unravel. The fire burned for hours. By dawn, the house was a black skeleton. Wood collapsed in piles. Windows melted. The roof caved in. Neighbors stood in small groups, stunned, unable to believe this had happened on their street. Detectives arrived as the sun rose. Among them was Detective Simon Hale, a steady, serious man with a practiced eye for details. He walked the charred perimeter with another detective, Riley Cross, who moved with methodical precision. They collected samples, scraped blackened wood into small containers, and took photos from multiple angles. Hale approached Caleb with a clipboard in hand. "Mr. Morris, we found traces of an accelerant along the back fence line. Whoever set the fire wanted the house to burn fast." Caleb nodded, his voice quiet. "I already knew." Riley walked over holding a melted piece of plastic in a sealed bag. "This looks like part of a gas can nozzle. We'll run tests, but it's promising evidence." Hale looked at Caleb. "Your security footage helped a lot." Caleb nodded slowly. "What did you find?" Hale took out a small tablet and showed him a grainy clip of a dark SUV circling the cul-de-sac at 2 in the morning. The timestamp matched the fire's estimated start. Hale pointed at the screen. "That plate belongs to Paula Hastings." Caleb closed his eyes. "Of course it does." Riley added, "We'll need every letter she sent, every note, every recording, anything that shows a pattern." Maya arrived just in time to hand over a folder thick with documents. She had been preparing it ever since Caleb's first neighbor complaint. "I knew she'd push this too far," Maya said quietly. Hale flipped through the pages, expression tightening. "This is a clear pattern of harassment and a strong motive." Throughout the day, neighbors came forward with statements. Janet told detectives about Paula's late-night pacing. Another neighbor said Paula had muttered hateful comments under her breath just days before. By afternoon, investigators had enough. They went to Paula's home with a warrant. Within hours, officers walked out holding a gas can. Tests later confirmed the accelerant inside matched what had been used on Caleb's house. Then came the arrest. Neighbors gathered at the edge of their lawns as officers walked Paula toward the patrol car. She didn't cry. She didn't look ashamed. She stared straight ahead like she still believed she was right. Janet whispered, "She looks proud." Eric muttered back, "That woman's mind snapped a long time ago." Caleb watched from a distance, exhausted, the ruins of his home behind him. He expected to feel relief. But all he felt was an emptiness too heavy to describe. He had spent years believing justice could fix anything. But justice didn't bring back photos, old memories, or the feeling of safety inside your own walls. Days later, Detective Riley called him with a final update. The DA is moving quickly given the evidence. This case will be on the docket soon, probably within days. Caleb exhaled quietly. "And who presides?" Riley hesitated. "Given the rotation, it could be you." Caleb closed his eyes and lowered his head. "Then we have a problem. But problems don't wait for the right time. And fate doesn't ask permission before setting two lives on a collision course." The moment Paula walked into Caleb's courtroom, the case became bigger than either of them. Bigger than Cedar Ridge. Bigger than one burning house. It became a question of what justice looks like when the victim and the judge are the same man. The morning of the arraignment arrived with a kind of tension the courthouse hadn't felt in years. Reporters formed a line outside the doors before sunrise, whispering to each other about the case that had turned a quiet Greenville neighborhood into headline news. People from Cedar Ridge drifted in one by one, sitting in the gallery with tight jaws and clasped hands. They weren't there for gossip. They were there because they had watched something dark unfold right outside their windows. Caleb entered through the side hallway wearing his robe, every step heavy. He had presided over hundreds of cases, but this one felt different in a way that made his breath catch for a moment. The courtroom was a place where he was supposed to be separate from emotion, separate from personal history, separate from fear. But no robe could erase the smell of smoke that still lived in his memory. The bailiff's voice cut through the hum of the crowd. "All rise." The room rose as one. The doors opened. Deputies guided Paula Hastings into the room. She walked stiffly, her hands bound in front of her. Her hair, once neatly styled during HOA meetings, now hung limp around her shoulders. Her eyes darted across the courtroom until they landed on Caleb. Her steps faltered. Someone in the gallery gasped softly. For the first time since the arrest, her face revealed something she couldn't hide. Not pride. Not anger. Something like disbelief that he was still standing there. Something like fear that she hadn't destroyed him after all. Her lawyer, a tense man named Mark Doyle, leaned down quickly. "Eyes on me, do not look at him." But it was too late. The whole room saw the shock settle on her face. It ran through the gallery like a ripple. Caleb steadied himself behind the bench. His voice was composed, even though his fingers pressed together tightly. "This court is now in session, case of State versus Hastings." A reporter in the back whispered to her colleague. "The judge is the victim. How is this even happening?" Mark stood. "Your Honor, I must address the conflict of interest. We request immediate reassignment." Caleb answered without hesitation. "Your concern is noted. Until reassignment is confirmed, we will continue today's hearing." The gallery stirred. Paula shook her head in disbelief, whispering something frantic under her breath. She looked smaller than she had ever looked before. Not defeated, cornered. When Mark announced her plea, the words hung heavy over every person listening. "My client pleads not guilty." A wave of murmurs filled the room. Not guilty. After everything. After the footage. After the gas can. after the months of harassment. Caleb kept his expression calm, though the denial felt like an insult so sharp it cut him from the inside. His house was gone. His history. His photographs. The place he breathed. And she had the audacity to deny it all. Through the railing, Paula looked at him. For a split second, her eyes held something chilling, almost satisfaction, as if the power of dragging him into this courtroom was victory enough. That moment stayed with him long after the hearing ended. The trial moved forward faster than anyone expected. Evidence was clear and overwhelming. But while the facts mattered, everyone knew the emotion behind them mattered too. By the second day, the courtroom was packed. Caleb kept his tone level. Every ruling deliberate. Every word balanced. He knew the world was watching him. He knew some people expected him to break. But each time he raised the gavel, he reminded himself what justice meant, not for him, but for the community. The prosecutor, Angela Ward, stood tall and organized, laying out the case step by step. She presented photos of the burned house, security footage clips, and the burnt remains investigators had collected from the scene. When the fire marshal testified, his voice was steady but somber. Accelerant was poured along the back fence line, ignited deliberately. The fire was set to spread fast. Caleb felt the room close in for a moment. He inhaled slowly and reminded himself to breathe. Mark tried to challenge the footage. Could the cameras have been altered? Could someone else have been driving her vehicle? But each question fell flat. The jury watched him with skepticism. His voice lacked conviction, as if even he knew he was grasping for excuses. Then came the neighbors. Janet stepped up to the stand first. She looked nervous, but when she began speaking, her voice gained strength. Paula watched Caleb's house night after night. She talked about him like he was some kind of threat. She was angry all the time. I told my husband something bad was coming. Mark attempted to undermine her testimony. Do you dislike my client? Janet looked him square in the eyes. I dislike cruelty, and she used it every chance she got. A murmur moved through the room. Then Eric testified. His voice carried the weight only a long friendship can give. I warned him. I told him she was slipping further every week. She wasn't just irritated, she was obsessed. I didn't want to believe she'd do something violent, but she did. Paula sat stiffly at the defense table. Sometimes she glared at witnesses. Sometimes she scribbled notes furiously. And sometimes she stared at Caleb with an expression that made even the deputies uneasy, like she still believed she could control the narrative. But the moment that shook the courtroom happened when Angela played the 911 call. Caleb's voice, broken by smoke and fear, filled the room. There was coughing, choking, words strained for breath, a request for help, an address given between gasps. Everyone froze. Paula's face lost all color. Her eyes widened. Her entire body stiffened as if the sound of what she had caused pierced something inside her. Maya sat in the front row gripping the bench. Tears filled her eyes. She closed them, listening to her brother's fear echo through the speakers as if the fire were happening all over again. Caleb held himself still, but his jaw tightened. His chest rose and fell in a slow, controlled rhythm. It wasn't the fire that returned to him. It was the feeling of standing on the grass barefoot, watching everything he loved burn. When the recording stopped, the courtroom remained silent for nearly 10 seconds. Angela spoke softly. This is what she caused. This is what he survived. Mark looked defeated. His shoulders slumped. Even Paula couldn't muster her usual defiance. Her hands trembled slightly, shackles clinking as she tried to steady herself. Caleb took a recess. He stepped into his chambers and shut the door quietly. For a moment, he leaned forward, elbows on his desk, hands gripping the edge tightly. Maya knocked once and stepped in. You don't have to do this, Caleb. Let another judge take it. He shook his head, voice soft. If I step away now, she gets to say she pushed me off the bench. I won't give her that power. Maya nodded, though her eyes were full of worry. Back in the courtroom, the final arguments approached. Angela stood before the jury and spoke with the clarity of someone who knew the truth didn't need decorating. This wasn't about rules or community standards, this was about hate. She destroyed a home, she nearly destroyed a life, and she did it because she believed she could get away with it. When it was Mark's turn, he tried to paint Paula as overwhelmed and stressed. He spoke about pressure, unfair judgment, misunderstandings. But the jury's expressions didn't change. They looked past the excuses. Because they had seen the truth. The tension thickened as everyone waited for the verdict. 4 hours later, the jurors returned. Eyes forward. Bodies tense. You could feel the entire courthouse holding its breath. Caleb prepared himself. Whatever the verdict would be, he had to remain steady. The foreperson unfolded the slip of paper. Guilty of felony arson. Guilty of property destruction. Guilty of aggravated harassment with hate enhancements. Whispers broke across the gallery. Maya closed her eyes. Eric let out a breath he'd been holding for what felt like days. Janet covered her mouth, tears gathering. Paula stared at the table, shaking her head, whispering no over and over as if it could undo the facts. Caleb's voice remained firm. The verdict is accepted. Sentencing will follow. The story did not end there. Sentencing day held its own storm, and Paula's final confrontation with Caleb would reveal a truth she could no longer deny.